If this sounds like you, I want you to stay with me for a moment. Before I start, can I ask, how old are you? And where are you watching from today? And if you've ever felt quietly pushed aside by the people you gave everything to, this story was made for you. You might want to subscribe, because what I'm about to share isn't polished or easy, but it's honest. I never imagined I'd hear those words from my own daughter. You're not invited. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. She said it the way people say things when they believe they're being reasonable. Like it was obvious. Like it didn't need explanation. We were standing in my kitchen when she said it. My kitchen. The one I'd cooked in for decades. The same countertops where she'd done homework, spilled juice, cried over breakups, laughed with friends. The room still smelled faintly like coffee because I just poured her a cup. She didn't touch it. She said the party was small, that it was just for friends, that it would be less awkward this way. She avoided my eyes while she talked, rearranging words so they sounded kinder than they were. I nodded. That's what I did first. I nodded because my body reacted before my heart caught up. Years of being agreeable don't disappear in one moment. I said, "Oh, okay." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath, relieved I wasn't making it harder. That relief hurt more than the words. After she left, I stood there longer than I should have. I stared at the mug she hadn't touched, at the thin skin of steam still rising, and I felt something sink into place. Not anger, not yet. Something heavier, like a truth I'd been circling for years, had finally decided to sit down. This wasn't the first time I'd been excluded. It was just the first time it was said out loud. For a long time, I'd told myself stories, that she was busy, that her life was full, that this was what independence looked like. I told myself good parents step back. Good parents don't make things about themselves. And maybe that's true. But somewhere along the way, stepping back turned into disappearing. I'd stopped being asked for opinions. Then I stopped being consulted. Then, quietly, I stopped being included. Still, I showed up when needed. I always did. Babysitting, financial help, last-minute favors, emotional support during moments no one else saw. I was there in the background, steady and reliable, like furniture you don't notice until it's gone. I didn't demand gratitude. I didn't keep score. Or at least, I told myself I didn't. But milestones change things. They have a way of exposing what we've been pretending not to see. This party wasn't just any gathering. It mattered to her. She talked about it for weeks. Decorations, guest list, venue. I listened. I asked questions. I helped where I could. I assumed, naively, that I'd be there too. When she told me I wasn't invited, she said it wasn't personal. That's the phrase people use when something is deeply personal and they don't want to sit with that discomfort. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table and let the quiet settle. I thought about all the times I'd rearranged my own life to make hers easier. All the ways I'd said yes without checking in with myself. All the moments I'd swallowed. Disappointment because I didn't want to seem needy or dramatic. I wondered when I taught her that my presence was optional. That night, I didn't cry. That surprised me. I cleaned the kitchen. I folded laundry. I did normal things with careful hands. Like if I moved slowly enough, the ache wouldn't catch up to me. But it did. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and replayed her words over and over. Not invited, not needed, not wanted there. I thought about how easily she'd said it. And then, I thought about something else. Something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. What if this wasn't just about a party? What if this was about the version of me they'd grown comfortable with? The one who stayed quiet. The one who adjusted. The one who didn't take up space. The idea scared me. Because if that was true, then I had a choice to make. And choices come with consequences. Over the next few days, messages flew back and forth in the family group chat. Plans, updates, jokes about outfits and playlists. No one mentioned the party directly, but it hovered there, unspoken. No one mentioned me either. That absence was loud. I could have confronted her. I could have asked why. I could have said how much it hurt. But I knew how that conversation would go. I'd end up minimizing myself just to keep the peace. And for the first time, I didn't want peace at that price. Instead, I did something unexpected. I opened my calendar. The day of her party was wide open, blank, empty, and as I looked at it, a thought formed, quiet, almost timid at first. What if I didn't spend that day waiting? What if I didn't sit at home, imagining what I was missing? What if I chose myself? That thought didn't feel rebellious. It felt unfamiliar, like a muscle I hadn't used in years twitching back to life. I didn't know what that would look like yet. I didn't have a plan. I just knew one thing. If I wasn't invited to her party, I didn't have to disappear. And that realization, small as it seemed, was the beginning of everything that came next. The idea stayed with me longer than I expected. It followed me through errands, through half-listened conversations, through the quiet moments right before sleep. That empty day on my calendar felt like a question I couldn't ignore anymore. For years, I'd let my life orbit around theirs. If there was an event, I attended. If there was a crisis, I stepped in. If there was silence, I filled it with understanding. I told myself that was love. And in many ways, it was. But love, I was learning, can become lopsided when it's never allowed to push back. I started small. I called a friend I hadn't seen in a while. Not to vent, not to complain, just to reconnect. We talked about nothing important. Weather, books, the strange relief of being heard, without having to justify yourself. When we hung up, I felt lighter, like I'd stepped out of a room where I'd been holding my breath. Then I did something else I hadn't done in a long time. I told the truth, quietly to myself. I admitted that I was hurt, that being excluded wasn't just a misunderstanding, that it echoed a pattern I'd been excusing for years. Once I said that, the ache sharpened, but so did my clarity. The party details kept trickling in through mutual acquaintances. Where it would be, who would be there, how much effort was going into making it perfect. I listened politely when people mentioned it, nodding as if I were just another outsider. No one asked if I was going. No one seemed to notice I wasn't. That hurt too. But it also confirmed something I needed to see. I wasn't being singled out. I was being erased. A few nights before the party, my daughter called. I thought, briefly, that maybe she was reconsidering, that maybe she'd realized how it looked, how it felt. But that wasn't why she called. She needed help. Money, this time. Something about last-minute expenses, decorations, catering. She spoke quickly, confidently, like this was a normal request. I listened. I let her finish. Then I said calmly, "I'm not going to do that." There was a pause on the line, a long one. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I'm not comfortable funding something I'm not welcome to be part of." Her tone changed immediately. Defensive. Sharp. She said I was making this about me, that I was being petty, that parents don't keep score. I felt the old pull again, the urge to smooth it over, to apologize, to explain myself into smaller and smaller pieces until she could accept me again. But instead, I said, "This isn't about keeping score. It's about respect." She scoffed, said I was overreacting, said I'd regret this. When the call ended, my hands were shaking. I sat there staring at my phone, half expecting another call, another message, something that would undo what I'd just said. Nothing came. That silence was different, heavier, more intentional. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind replayed the conversation, searching for cracks, for places I could have said something differently. That's the thing about finally setting a boundary. It forces you to confront how much you've relied on self-blame to keep relationships intact. The morning of the party arrived bright and clear. Too clear. The kind of day that makes everything feel exposed. I woke up early, made coffee, and stood by the window watching the neighborhood come to life. Cars pulling out of driveways, dogs being walked, life continuing as if nothing had shifted. But something had. Instead of dressing for a party I wasn't attending, I dressed for myself. Comfortably. Intentionally. I chose clothes that felt like me, not like a version of myself trying to fit into someone else's frame. I went out. I didn't announce anything. I didn't post online. I didn't make a point of being seen. I just moved through the day the way I wanted to. A long lunch with people who laughed easily. A walk by the water. Conversations that weren't careful or guarded. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for permission to enjoy my own life. Somewhere in the afternoon, I felt it. The shift from distraction to intention. I wasn't avoiding the party anymore. I was choosing something else. That choice did something unexpected. It brought back a memory I hadn't thought about in years. A younger version of myself, full of plans and opinions and boundaries that hadn't yet been negotiated away. I remembered who I used to be before I learned that being agreeable kept the peace. By evening, messages started to come in. Not from my daughter, from others. Confused questions. Subtle accusations disguised as concern. Are you okay? We missed you. Everything all right? I replied politely. Briefly. I didn't explain. Later, I learned that my absence had been noticed more than my presence ever was. People asked where I was. Someone mentioned I'd helped pay for things. Someone else realized, out loud, that I wasn't there. The party went on. Of course it did. But something had cracked. I went home that night tired in a good way. Not drained, not resentful, just aware. I sat on my couch, kicked off my shoes, and felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I hadn't ruined anything. I hadn't caused a scene. I'd simply stopped compensating for my own exclusion. And that, it turned out, was louder than any confrontation. The fallout didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces, scattered across days and conversations, the way consequences often do when no one wants to name them directly. The first sign was the silence from my daughter. Not even anger, just absence. No calls, no messages, no acknowledgement of the boundary I'd set or the money I hadn't given. That silence felt intentional, like a punishment designed to make me uncomfortable enough to come back and apologize. I almost did. I'd be lying if I said I didn't pick up my phone more than once, thumb hovering over her name. The urge was physical, a tightening in my chest, a restless energy in my hands. Years of conditioning don't disappear because of one brave decision. My body still believed that connection depended on my compliance. I kept reminding myself of something important. Silence is also communication. And this silence was saying, "You've stepped out of line." Other family members reached out instead. Not to ask how I was, but to relay concern. Carefully worded messages about how hurt she was, how confused, how this whole situation was unnecessary. No one asked why I'd been excluded. No one questioned the original moment. The focus stayed firmly on my reaction, not the action that caused it. That pattern was familiar. I responded with calm, neutral replies. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I just said I needed some space, that I loved her, and that I hoped we could talk when emotions settled. Inside, though, I was unraveling. At night, doubt crept in. I replayed every decision I'd made as a parent, searching for proof that I'd failed somewhere fundamental. Maybe I'd been too available. Maybe I'd shielded her from consequences. Maybe I'd taught her, without realizing, that my needs were optional. Those thoughts hurt because they felt plausible. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing your best intentions may have contributed to your own erasure. It's not dramatic, it's quiet and corrosive. I cried more during that period than I had in years, but never all at once. Just small moments, standing at the sink, folding clothes, hearing a song that reminded me of a version of us that felt simpler, kinder. I questioned myself constantly. Was I being stubborn? Was this pride masquerading as self-respect? Would it be easier to just smooth things over and go back to how things were? The honest answer was yes. It would have been easier. But every time I imagined going back, I felt something else too. A deep, heavy exhaustion. The kind that comes from knowing you're about to betray yourself again. The consequences weren't just emotional. Practical things changed too. I stopped being included in plans altogether. Invitations dried up. Information was filtered. I'd find out about events after they happened, through social media or casual mentions. It felt like I was being slowly phased out. That hurt more than I expected. Even though I'd chosen to step back, I hadn't anticipated how quickly my absence would be normalized. It forced me to confront a hard truth. My presence had been valuable, but not irreplaceable in the way I'd believed. And yet, beneath the grief, something else was happening. I started noticing how much energy I had, how my days felt less tense, how I wasn't constantly bracing for the next request or emotional emergency. The relief was subtle but undeniable. That contrast made the pain more complicated, because now I wasn't just mourning what I'd lost, I was grappling with what I'd gained. One afternoon, I sat with that contradiction and finally let myself say it out loud. I missed her, but I didn't miss how small I'd felt. That admission scared me. It felt disloyal, like I was choosing myself over my child, which goes against everything we're taught. Parents are supposed to sacrifice, to endure, to love unconditionally. But unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional access. That idea took time to settle. The breaking point came when I overheard something I wasn't meant to. A conversation between relatives, not knowing I was nearby. They were discussing the party, laughing about how dramatic I'd been, how I'd made it about money, how I'd always had a martyr streak. Hearing myself reduced to a caricature hurt in a new way. It stripped away the last illusion that my intentions mattered more than their convenience. I didn't confront them. I didn't storm out. I just listened, quietly, and let the truth land. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something settle into place. A calm, heavy resolve. I realized that denial wasn't just something I'd been doing about my daughter's behavior. It was something I'd been doing about my own limits. I believed that if I gave enough, loved enough, stayed patient enough, things would eventually balance out. That fairness would emerge naturally. But fairness doesn't appear where boundaries don't exist. The consequence of ignoring myself for so long was this moment, standing alone, grieving a relationship that had depended on my silence. And yet, even in that grief, there was clarity. I couldn't control how they saw me. I couldn't force understanding. I couldn't undo years of dynamic in one decision. What I could do was decide what came next. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly healed or confident. The shift happened slowly, in ways that were easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. At first, the quiet felt wrong. Too much space. Too many hours without checking my phone or anticipating someone else's needs. I'd spent so long orienting my days around other people that being alone with myself felt unfamiliar, almost unsafe. So I filled the time the way I always had, by being useful. I reorganized closets, helped neighbors, took on little tasks that made me feel needed. But even that started to change. One afternoon, halfway through doing something purely out of habit, I stopped. I asked myself a question I'd never asked before. Do I actually want to do this? Or am I just afraid of sitting with myself? That question became a turning point. I began choosing more deliberately. Sometimes that meant saying yes. Other times, it meant letting the phone ring. It meant pausing before offering help. It meant noticing the tight feeling in my chest when I agreed to something I didn't want, and honoring it instead of pushing through. This wasn't about punishment or withdrawal. It was about recalibration. I started seeing a therapist, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted language for what I was experiencing. I wanted to understand how love and self-erasure had become so tangled in my life. In those sessions, I learned something uncomfortable. I'd confused endurance with virtue. I'd believed that the more I tolerated, the more loving I was being. And I taught the people around me to expect that version of me. Letting go of that identity felt like grief. There were days I missed her fiercely. I'd see something that reminded me of my daughter, a song, a memory, a moment I wished I could share, and the ache would return full force. I let myself feel it without acting on it. I learned that longing doesn't always require response. Weeks passed, then months. The first real crack came quietly. A message from her, late at night. No apology, no explanation. Just a simple, "Are you okay?" I stared at it for a long time. I could have poured everything into that reply. I could have used it as an opening to finally be heard. Instead, I answered honestly and briefly. I'm doing better. I hope you are too. She didn't reply right away, but something shifted after that. The silence changed shape. It wasn't punitive anymore. It was cautious. When we eventually spoke again, it wasn't a reunion. It was careful, awkward. We circled around the hurt without naming it directly. And for the first time, I didn't rush to make it comfortable. I let the pauses exist. When she finally said, I didn't realize how much you did, I didn't minimize it. I didn't say it was nothing. I just said, I needed you to see me. She didn't argue. That moment didn't fix everything. Some things stayed broken. Some trust took time. Some dynamics never fully returned to what they were. And that was okay. Because I wasn't the same person anymore. I no longer measured my worth by how indispensable I was. I stopped equating love with exhaustion. I learned that being invited into someone's life means more than being useful behind the scenes. The real party I hosted that day, the one without them, wasn't about spite or revenge. It was about reclaiming my presence, about reminding myself that I don't need permission to take up space. And here's the hardest truth I learned. Sometimes, people don't change until you do. And sometimes, even then, they don't change in the way you hoped. But you still change. I didn't lose my family. I lost the version of myself that believed love required invisibility. And in its place, I found something quieter, but stronger: self-respect. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. You can love deeply without disappearing. You can care without contorting yourself. And the people who truly value you will adjust when you stop shrinking. So I'll leave you with this.